Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Commerce IQ live stream. I'm Tim Campbell, Commerce IQ's head of industry insights. And today we have our last live stream of the year. And we're going to kind of take a look back and discuss lessons that we learned in 2022 that we can hopefully apply for the future and just kind of keep in mind as we're making our future plans. And today we're going to do something a little bit different than what we've done in the past. I don't actually have any slides. I'm just going to be talking to you directly, and it's a bit more, perhaps a bit more conversational than what we've done in the past. So let's talk about it. So a look back, learnings from the year. What are those learnings, right? And there's 5 that I want to talk about to you today. It's a good prime odd number to go over. And the first one, no surprise, what did we learn from 2022? The post-COVID future is unexpected and unpredictable, right? Nothing too shocking there, except for the fact of all the shocks that did occur in 2022. And I'm not just talking about COVID, right? I mean, you think about the climate, you think about geopolitics, a lot of unexpected things happen that if you were to look back at predictions, at the end of 2021 about what the future held in store, you find a lot of accurate predictions, but you also find, a scant mention of a lot of the things that did happen, as well as outright wrong predictions of things that never occurred, predictions of things that would occur that never actually happened. So what am I talking about here? Okay, so I mean, obviously the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that, in geopolitical circles, sure, maybe certainly some people expected that. But I think its effect on the economy, if you're looking at retail predictions, that was not anticipated at all, right? The rise in commodity prices and food prices and metal prices that went up as a result of that caused ripple effects in the supply chain, not foreseen. The rise in fuel prices that occurred for much of the year, that bump up, not really foreseen, right? A lot of times retail and the economy, they're affected by external factors that just can't be predicted. And I think these external shock effects to demand or supply, they're just going to become more common, right? I mean, the climate's becoming more unpredictable. The state of geopolitics is always unpredictable, but arguably a bit more unpredictable now, especially with global trade kind of in flux. And it's just outright unpredictable, right? And there's other things that happen too. I think about the pullback on discretionary goods that happened. A lot of retailers and brands that played in those categories thought, hey, this new level of demand we're seeing, it's great. And it's either going to sustain or, the pullback will be more moderate to normal levels. But for a lot of discretionary categories, the pullback was severe. It was kind of, people had bought up a lot in 2020 and 2021, and they didn't need to buy those same things again in 2022. So growth was either, declining, it was slower than it was normal, say pre-pandemic, or outright saw sales declines in those categories, right? Same thing happened in e-commerce as well, right? E-commerce exploded 2020, 2021. 2022, there was a big pullback that a lot of took a lot of brands and retailers kind of by surprise, just the extent of that pullback as shoppers went back to stores. Now there was still a permanent boost that the pandemic had on e-commerce, but not as large as was anticipated, say in late 2021. Over the course of several years, and it just goes to show some routines aren't easily changed, right? Even in the face of huge shocks. When those shocks are removed, consumers will try to go back to their old behavior. Now, that might be hard to reach if shocks are constantly happening, kind of, as we potentially expect. But still, consumers are resilient, and that's actually part of the reason why I would say the metaverse, for instance, is falling so flat at the moment. Is that consumers want to go back to in-person experiences. They don't necessarily want to spend all their time, staring at a screen, which was kind of forced somewhat. Or at least indirectly encouraged by the pandemic, right? And this makes all predictions, even looking forward for 2023, exceedingly difficult, especially if they're quantitative, right? Setting out, hey, we're going to grow by this much or this amount in any category is very difficult to do right now. So what's the takeaway, right? The post-COVID future is unexpected. That's not too surprising. And what it means, though, for you as really as a consumer, as a retailer, or as a brand, is you need to engage in multiple scenario planning, right? You need to be very flexible and determine if this happens, we do this. If this happens, we do this. If this third option happens, we do something else entirely. Don't be so married to one approach that if that doesn't happen, your plans are completely thrown out of whack and you can't adjust. Just be flexible. The second learning from the year is that consumer spend is more resilient than we may have anticipated, right? Especially if it's on the right things. Overall consumer spend, despite declining in a lot of discretionary categories, like I mentioned, is largely resilient. I mean, even in the face of continued inflation, consumers kept spending throughout almost all of 2022. Of course, the verdict's still in on Q4, and maybe it won't hold up, but even so, consumer spending has just been strong for at least the first 3 quarters of the year, much stronger than I think would have been anticipated, say, back in Q1 of 2022, right? The threat of recession was looming, and it seems like this recession keeps getting pushed back. Not saying it won't happen, just saying consumer spend has been more resilient. It's taken longer to get there than anticipated. Consumers are resilient, and especially on the right categories, right? When you think about how consumers spend on travel, experiences, those shot up kind of in a post-COVID environment. Consumers are still spending on travel long after the key vacation periods are typically done. They're still traveling, they're still going out, they're still spending on experiences as well. And so what does this mean for a brand? It means, yes, consumers are concerned about price in the face of inflation, but it also means if you give consumers what they value, they're willing to spend on it, right? Right now, that's travel and experiences. But if you provide kind of that emotional connection to shoppers, and you're willing to give them really what they want, you can also transcend price and give them that broader concept of holistic value. The third learning from 2022 is that kind of looking a bit under the hood here on the brand and retailer side is that when shopping, shoppers pay attention to what they see. Now, what do I mean by this? Particularly, I'm talking about e-commerce. They are engaged in more comparative shopping than they have before over the past several years. They'll compare brands, they'll compare options, but they trust what search results serve up to them. If they see, they make a search and they see 5 different brands or 5 different products compared above the fold, they'll compare those 5 different products. Not many, unless it's a highly considered purchase, not many shoppers are going to scroll down to see, what's on page 2 or what's, far below the fold, right? And that means that retail media spend is hugely important. Of course, that's the driver of what shoppers see. If visibility is king, kind of as we've learned, retail media spend needs to be budgeted appropriately, and it's absolutely crucial to understand, where, if you're a brand, where you're spending, or if you're a retailer, how you're managing your platform. Retail media spend exploded in 2022, as it did in the prior year as well. Spending in 2021 was already very high. In 2022, it was even higher, especially around key holiday periods. It's proven to be an effective metric or effective tool, and it's not a mature industry yet, just like e-commerce as a whole. But retail media still has a lot of room to grow, and shoppers are responding to it largely because they find those ads, the sponsored results, relevant. And they'll just trust that, hey, you've served something up to me. I trust that it's a good price, that it's the relevant product. I'm just going to compare the sponsored results that I get. That is increasingly being the case over and above even organic search results much of the time. So what does this mean for you if you're a brand? I mean, you want to get your budget right. You want to make sure you're looking at the right things when you manage your retail media budget. Look at like the lifetime value of the shopper versus just a limited 2-week attribution window. Make sure you're not just looking at ROAS, but you're also looking at your share of voice, and you're planning on future share of voice that you want to achieve to drive future sales. Retail media should not just be an exercise in examining efficiency. It should also be an exercise in looking at how can you most effectively get incremental spend for your brand, and share of voice is a great way of doing that. Learning number 4 from 2022, supply chains need to be diverse, right? I feel like 2021 was one half of that lesson. 2022 is kind of the second half. 2021 was all about, wow, demand can really spike quickly, rapidly, and unexpectedly. How do we ramp up our supply chains to deal with this? And 2022, for a lot of those discretionary categories, was kind of the opposite lesson. It was, wow, demand really fell off a cliff for a lot of durable and discretionary goods. Now we have to find a way to profitably reduce our supply chain and reduce costs with all this excess capacity that we have, right? And all that means is that, again, kind of goes back to the unpredictability of 2022 and how that is likely to continue. But also that supply chains need to be able to be ramped up and ramped down. They need to be diverse. They need to be, and there's a few different, options that are kind of growing rapidly to serve this need, right? Pop-up warehouses that can quickly be used or discarded, much more traditional than traditional fulfillment or warehousing capabilities. Paying attention to where you source, where manufacturers or brands source their product from. There's an above average amount of jobs are being reshored right now in manufacturing. You have production being brought back from overseas, brought back from China and other countries to the US because it's a bit more predictable and also shorter lead times, just closer to the end consumer, closer to the rest of the local supply chain. And that means that you can make changes more effectively and more efficiently if demand spikes or falls. It's just more flexible in general. Another thing being pursued is kind of the China plus one strategy. You can pursue in China. You can, open up. You can have shop in China, but you can also have a shop in Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, other countries to hopefully better navigate, trade tensions, geopolitical tensions, COVID tensions, and be more prepared for the future. Another thing to keep in mind is that while is kind of the whole notion of supply chain up until recently has been based on just in time inventory, and now we've kind of learned in 2022 we really need to pursue just in case inventory. Right? How do you have enough inventory on hand to deal with those unexpected shocks, or flexibility to deal with drops in demand as well? That could make inflation worse. It could make the supply chain more expensive if you're focused on flexibility rather than efficiency. But with so many shocks occurring, it's worth it and will actually reduce costs in the long run, kind of in this new normal. And also, these costs can be helped by investing in the right tech to monitor your supply chain, to make changes automatically, so that you're more aligned with what's happening on the ground. And speaking of tech, that brings us to our last learning of this session. Tech is more important than ever. That's learning number 5. Technology is more important than it's ever been. I mean, yes, big tech is, you're seeing a lot of those layoffs in the media, but in general, from a retail perspective, from a brand and retailer perspective, investing in technology long-term is the right call to be able to deal with a more unpredictable world, and a world that's more heavily relying on, sponsored and automated results from retail media and ad spend and where that spend is going, responding to real-time changes. All of this needs to be managed by technology to make it as efficient as possible, especially if we are indeed headed towards a more proper recession in 2023. Efficiency is the name of the game, and and technology helps maximize efficiency. Strangely enough, that might mean investing more in technology to manage your brand or to manage your assortment as a retailer, rather than less. But long term, the gains from that outweigh the negatives. So technology becoming more important than ever, and that's also enabled by just how much data as retailers and as brands that we're tracking now that we weren't tracking before can help inform that technology. All right, those are our 5 lessons. To recap, the 5 things we learned in 2022. 1, the post-COVID future is unexpected and unpredictable, so you need to engage in multiple scenario planning. 2, consumer spend is surprisingly resilient, so you need to make sure you're giving consumers what they value, because if you do, they're willing to spend on it. Number 3, shoppers pay attention to what they see in e-commerce. Visibility is king, and that ties into the increasing importance of ad spend and retail media. Number 4, supply chains need to be diversified, and they need to have a greater focus on just-in-case inventory versus just-in-time inventory. And finally, technology is more important than ever. That wraps us up for the last live stream, Commerce IQ live stream of the year. I hope you have a great rest of your holiday season, and I hope to present again to you soon. Have a great rest of your day and week.